But unfortunately, people are going to starve. It is inevitable. There is going to be a deficit in calories, especially if they get their way. There will be a deficit in calories. Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a pretty long video, but I have something here that I think you ought to hear. So go ahead and grab yourself a cup of coffee and you can listen on if you like. There's nothing fancy about my videos, as you already know, so there's not going to be any kind of graphic stuff or anything like that. But the information in this article, and I have something else to show you, is pretty revealing as to what's going on as far as all of the problems that we've got going on in the world. Now, I've often said that the people that we elect to represent us, they don't care about us. All they care about is power, and all they care is about fulfilling their agenda at whatever cost. And almost always, if not always, it is at the cost of the people. All they want is control. Now, I'm not saying that everything that I'm going to read you is factual, 100% factual, but it is very coincidental what's been going on in the last several years. And their final motive, in my opinion, I will show you within this article what their final motive is, because it is going to allow them to have complete control over everyone. And I'm not talking about a CBDC. That's part of it. A centrally banked digital currency. That's part of it. But when you have control of food, you have control of people. But when you have control of everything, you have control of everything, ladies and gentlemen. And that is their quest. And who is they? A lot of people ask me, who is the they? Well, they, ladies and gentlemen, are those that are always touting to help their nations, when in fact they take from their nations and give to others, especially themselves. It's they that we elect to represent us, we the people. And when they get into office, they then pass laws and regulations that help themselves and not we the people. It is they that spend their time asking for donations from large corporations so that they can pass laws that help those corporations, but not the mom and pop shops. It is they that when they enter office, they are mostly not wealthy, but when they leave office, they are extremely wealthy on the backs of you and I, the people that fund them through their legislation. We fund them so that they can write legislation to help us, and instead they write legislation to help themselves. That's who they is, ladies and gentlemen. So if you want to put any names in there, you can just fill in the blank. They is, go ahead, fill in the blank for whatever country you live in. Many experts have been explaining the record inflation the U.S. is facing simply on supply chain issues caused by this health crisis. But these disruptions in the supply chain were not merely a spontaneous effect of the health crisis. In early 2020, the federal government declared a national emergency, and the entire country shut down for months, which produced the initial supply chain issues that led to many of the problems that we are facing today. And I've said, ladies and gentlemen, in the past, that the problems we are facing is not because of the health crisis, but because of the policies that were passed by these individuals that we sent to Washington, D.C. to represent us. Eventually, the majority of the medical community conceded that the imposed shelter-in-place policies caused more deaths than if there were no shutdowns at all. Yet every institution continues to act as if it was the health crisis and not their reaction that produced these problems. I've stated before that these individuals that are in those high places of power, they know exactly what they're doing. The thing is that they lie. They lie to you, ladies and gentlemen. They tell you one thing when in the back rooms, they're telling their buddies the exact opposite. The issues that lockdowns caused soon worsened after the federal government, advised by the CDC, printed a record amount of money, injected trillions of dollars into the economy, and then introduced a moratorium on the payment of rent and mortgage. These actions were worsened by the record business closures and worker shortage, which further exacerbated the supply chain issues. As bad as everything is now, though, it seems like somehow it's about to get a lot worse. Over the past few months, dozens of food processing plants have either exploded or caught on fire. Barns have also been spontaneously bursting into flames, and tens of millions of chickens have been exterminated since November of last year. Now, I did a little bit of research on the food processing plants in the United States, and when you equate the number of fires that we have had this year so far, which is a couple of dozen, I believe, compared to the 25,000 or so processing plants in the United States, it's really not that much. And usually, on average, we have, between a dozen and 2 dozen processing plant fires in the United States. However, it happening now just exacerbates the problem that we are already facing. So it's in more of a public view than normal. On March 21st, a Walmart distribution center in Indianapolis, Indiana caught fire, requiring over 350 firefighters to extinguish it. In February, an explosion caused significant damage at Shearer's Food in Hermiston, Oregon, and in April, a food processing plant in Salinas, California, suffered a large fire. Additionally, small planes have also crashed into 2 food processing plants in Idaho and Georgia within weeks of each other. And they go on to say these are just a few examples on what many are calling an attack on our food supply chain, while it is already in an extremely vulnerable state. What I think is that this may be smoke. This may be smoke and mirrors, smoke that they're putting in front of your eyes so that you can be talking about this and everyone can be concentrating on this while something else is going on in the background. And they go over a few tweets here. And this is from Wall Street Silver, which I highly recommend if you're not subscribed to Wall Street Silver. And they say this is an odd coincidence. 18 U.S. food processing facilities burned down in the last 6 months. The Guardian recently released a detailed analysis of mass culling at a plant in Iowa in response to a new bird flu threat, which was previously believed to be contained within the borders of Asia. The report states that after detecting a single cause of avian influenza overnight, the factory slaughtered more than 5 million chickens using a gruesome killing method. So they detected one cause and one case and they slaughtered 5 million chickens. Kind of like sounds like what they're doing in China, where they have the zero policy for the health crisis. If they see one person or 2 people have it, they shut down the entire city. The slaughter of at least 5 million hens at Rembrandt is the largest culling at any factory farm in the country. Now, meat processing plants across North America are bracing for what experts fear could be a catastrophic loss of poultry. According to another article, another 27 million birds were culled due to the flu, which scientists say they are using PCR tests to detect. And from what I understand, these tests may not be that reliable. In addition to this, Northern Ireland is planning to kill off more than 1 million sheep, not because they're sick, ladies and gentlemen, in order to meet its new legally binding climate emissions target. So they're going to cull over 1 million sheep because they fart. And I'm not even being funny about that. Because if that's the case, if they consider animals that excrete methane, what do we excrete, ladies and gentlemen? According to a report from The Guardian, Northern Ireland will need to kill more than 1 million sheep and cattle to meet their new climate targets after passing its first major climate act. The massive reduction in farm animals is based on a legal requirement under the Act of the Farming Sector to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and reduce methane emissions by almost 50%. And I'll go ahead on the record and say this, that this climate stuff that they're imposing on everyone, that is one of the biggest schemes in history. Meanwhile, in Australia, pork supply is set to plunge as Japanese encephalitis has been reportedly detected across piggeries. Around 30 New South Wales piggeries have been affected so far by the mosquito-borne virus, and 11 people have been infected, with 3 deaths nationwide. And listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. The disease has absolutely no impact on consuming pork. But Dr. Britton said production losses were likely to affect availability. This climate stuff is a war against the people, ladies and gentlemen. Think about it. Energy is everything, and energy is carbon. So the more energy that becomes unavailable to humanity, the less humanity that there will be. Because let's say, for example, that you have 10 people in a room, and each person lives on a 2,000 calorie a day diet, right? Let's say that the calories that are going to that room get cut from 20,000 calories, averaging 2,000 per person, to only 10,000 calories. Not all 10 people there will be able to live on 1,000 calorie a day. This is what they're saying here. They want to cut emissions down by 50%. So some of those 10 people are either going to have to fight for their calories, fight for the resources available, or some of them are just going to vanish and go away because there won't be enough resources in order for all 10 people to survive. And here they talk about the ongoing war in Ukraine. And ladies and gentlemen, this gets a lot better. All right. So I hope that you stay with me through this. Here they're talking about the ongoing war in Ukraine that has also had a massive effect on shipments of fertilizer and wheat, as Russia and Ukraine are part of the top 5 exporters of wheat in the world. And we've talked about this in length. Because of this, Lebanese mills are quickly running out of wheat as Lebanon, Syria, and countries in Africa head towards seemingly inevitable famine. And we, ladies and gentlemen, we, those nations that have imposed sanctions and or threaten countries that get their sustenance from Russia, threaten them with sanctions if they continue to buy from them, it is because of those sanctions that these people will starve. China, the third largest exporter of fertilizer in the world, banned exports of the product last summer, reportedly in an effort to keep domestic food prices low. The U.S. is the number 2 wheat exporter in the world, but recent agricultural reports conclude that U.S. winter wheat is at its lowest condition rating in over a decade, and I've gone over that before. Right now, our very good to excellent feed, as far as wheat goes, is the lowest that it's been in a very long time. I think it's down to like 30% or so, which is really not a lot at all, being that last year I think it was 56%. And the USDA reports 69% of total U.S. winter wheat production is currently in drought zones. Additionally, according to a report from CF Industries, a leading global distributor of fertilizer, Union Pacific, notified the company that they will be limiting shipments of fertilizer by nearly 20% during the spring planting season, which is when the farmers need the fertilizer the most. In March, Tony Will, the executive of CF Industries, warned, "My biggest concern is that we end up with a very severe shortage of food in certain areas of the world." Now, is that going to happen here in the United States or in whatever Western nation you live in? More than likely, like I've stated in the past, a shortage of food is first going to show its ugly head by the cost of foods. So people will be priced out of the food market. They will not be able to afford to eat. And then they will turn to their churches, to their food banks. But what happens when they can no longer get food? Because there's no money coming from the federal government anymore, which is why you should never rely on the federal government for money. I digress. Or because they just are not getting the donations that they were used to getting, because people that used to donate to food banks are now going to food banks to get help. There are also currently major freeze warnings and heavy rains in parts of Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois, which has delayed getting seeds and plants in the ground in those areas. Moreover, during a recent 10-hour hearing for the Surface Transportation Board on April 28th, railroads announced that they have dropped around 25 to 30% of their workforce at the height of a transportation crisis. Many employees also implied there might be a strike coming. Beginning in 2020, a string of countless barn fires occurred across America and in Europe, in what media outlets call a strange anomaly, similar to the fires and explosions at food processing plants happening today. And here, the Animal Welfare Institute says that more than 1.6 million farm animals, including nearly 1.3 million cage-free egg hens, perished in the fires. Throughout 2021 and 2022, an even higher rate of barn fires seem to be occurring, with many of them started by arson. And we've covered this in the past as well. The FBI recently warned that there is a high risk of cyber attacks to farms and processing plants, as well as ransom attacks that actually have occurred here in this year in March. A multi-state grain company that provides seed and fertilizer also cited several other attacks that took place in November of 2021. The same month, several barn fires occurred. And I'm going to skip some of this stuff, ladies and gentlemen, but please come back and revisit this article because it is excellent, all right? In May of 2021, there was reportedly a cyber attack against the Colonial Pipeline, and we remember that. Remember that the East Coast was running out of gasoline and stuff like that? And it says the attack forced JBS to shut down several plants in the U.S. and Australia, which rattled beef markets. And according to John Hoffman, a senior research fellow at the Food Protection and Defense Institute, the attack has continued to reverberate. And additionally, the increased price of oil has an obvious trickle-down effect on transportation, as we all know, and it adds those costs to the end consumer. To make matters worse, Russia recently announced that they will be completely shutting off their gas supply to Poland and Bulgaria, which experts say will lead to a 24% increase in the price of gas in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, can anyone here, leave it in the comments, can anyone here tell me that things look like they're getting better? I remember a gentleman who left me a comment on a video, I don't know, about a year ago or so. And he said, do you really think that things are going to get worse? And I said, absolutely. And I think he says something like, I'm going to go ahead and date stamp this reply so that we can revisit it in a year. I don't think I've heard from that person back. This one here, it says, as I have pointed out for many months, there are 9 grains and oilseed commodities in the U.S. which have a tight ending stock, meaning a small carryover, a carryover that would not be enough to feed us for the entire year. And even with that tight carryover, I guarantee you we will be exporting food to China. All right, ladies and gentlemen. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen, let me cover something really quick. A lot of people think that these types of videos are to scare them. Absolutely not. It's to inform you. To inform you, because if you've lived a life of consuming nothing but garbage media, then that's the media that you're going to get. And like I've said before, these people don't care about you. I care about my country. I care about my countrymen. I don't want people to starve. But unfortunately, people are going to starve. It is inevitable. There is going to be a deficit in calories, especially if they get their way. There will be a deficit in calories. All right, ladies and gentlemen? So I do this because I want you to be motivated to prepare. I'm not trying to sell you fear. I'm just trying to sell you a different point of view from someone that actually cares about the people that he is broadcasting to, I guess you can say. All right? Not trying to put myself in any kind of level, but the people that I'm talking to. Too big of a coincidence to be just a coincidence. Fertilizer shortages are real now because Russia is a big exporter of fertilizer. We all know this. Even though fertilizer is not sanctioned, less fertilizer is coming out of Russia. And I really don't understand yet why it is that Russia is not sanctioning the rest of the world. See, they're still selling fertilizer. They're still allowing gas to flow through if the countries that want that gas pay in their currency. But they're still letting some fertilizer out, but I don't think it's going to be enough. We may get by this year with this planting season, barely, right? As you just saw, the carryovers are limited this year. But next year, ladies and gentlemen, if this war continues in Russia and these sanctions continue, and China continues to do what they're doing over there with locking down pretty much their manufacturing base, we are going to be feeling it in a way that we have not felt it in our lifetimes. So this is why I am so adamant to put out the message that you must prepare now. If you're not preparing, you must prepare now. In April of 2021, this administration escalated a decades-old climate program that pays farmers not to farm. And it's called the Conservation Reserve Program, where they pay them not to farm a certain acreage of land and to just let that land sit. Last year, the administration rebranded a $2.3 billion Conservation Reserve Program, now a key tactic in its efforts to cut agriculture's carbon footprint. Like I said, carbon is calories. All right, carbon is calories, ladies and gentlemen. So as they are paying money that they take from us to allow farmers to farm less, they are actually taking money from us so that we can pay more for food, because that will be a guarantee. According to reports from March of 2022, a similar state-level plan was launched in California. And who would have imagined that? Here they say that back in 2012, many media outlets were predicting that climate change would create food shortages and turn the world vegetarian by 2050. And in 2019, the UN warned that lack of water due to climate change would cause mass food shortages. These are just a few of the strange warnings that have been occurring for the past several years now. I'll read a couple of them and I'll let you come back and read the rest. It says here that in March of 2022, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, warned what he called the entitled generation to brace for the shock of food shortages and higher inflation. Around the same time, experts alerted Americans that they will be paying an additional $433 a month on average for basic goods in 2022. Around the same time, at the World Government Summit in 2022, Mr. Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, stated that global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will soon deeply be affected. Just a few days earlier, it was reported by Bloomberg that the president informed the world that they will experience real food shortages as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In April, Rockefeller Foundation president provided Bloomberg Television's David Weston with a timeline of when the massive, immediate food crisis begins, and he said within 6 months. And I'll finish it off with this last warning here, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, we are reducing food supply stocks around the world. There are strategic reserves getting opened up. As that starts to get diminished and the production numbers come out, and God willing, we have good weather this year. God willing is right. Regardless, it is going to be a humanitarian disaster within a year. And we will see hundreds of millions of people starving. The United States once held a vast grain supply, or a vast reserve of grains across the country. By 2015, the U.S. national grain reserves were basically completely wiped out. Reports say this was primarily due to globalization and the 1996 abolishment of our national system of holding grain in reserve. Then in 2008, the USDA decided to liquidate what was left of the National Grain Reserve into its dollar equivalent. Well, we're going to find out very soon, ladies and gentlemen, that printing money does not equate to printing food. There have been quite a few strange simulations. Let's talk about some of the simulations that have occurred here in the past few years. In October of 2019, I remember this one. I did a video on this, Event 201, which was a simulation of what would happen if there was a health crisis, pretty much such as what we've gone through. And it says here that according to the Center for Health Security, Event 201 was a tabletop simulation meant to simulate an outbreak of a health crisis transmitted from bats to pigs to people that eventually leads to a severe health crisis. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, is this all coincidence? I mean, I'll let you decide. Reality of the matter is this, is that it doesn't matter whether it's coincidence or not. What matters is are you going to have food if food runs out? Are you going to have the things you need if those things run out? That's what really matters. Are you preparing for the possibility of not being able to get the things that you normally get on an everyday basis? Are you preparing for that now, hearing what you're hearing? They say that in addition to this, the World Economic Forum hosted a string of tabletop exercises entitled Cyber Polygon, aimed at preparing the world for cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. At the time, before the WEF deleted the breakdown of the exercises from their website, the group led by Mr. Schwab warned that this new crisis would be even more significant economic and social implications than the health crisis we've just been through. So now take a look at the last 2 years and see how destructive the policies that were passed because of that health crisis have been to our social stability and also to our economic stability and also to the way that we can produce food, right? Look at how many effects it's had. Now here they're predicting that it's going to be even worse, that if we have a cyber attack, that it will be even worse than what we've gone through. Are you preparing yet? Are you convinced yet? No? Okay, let's carry on then. And another simulation that occurred in 2015 was called Food Chain Reaction, a Global Food Security Game. During this exercise, 65 international policymakers gathered at the World Wildlife Fund's headquarters in Washington, D.C. to game out how the world would respond to a future food crisis. The game, which occurred in 2015, took the players from the year 2020, imagine that, to 2030. The simulated decade brought two major food crises, with prices approaching 400% of the long-term average. During the exercise, global food shortages happened in 2022, and in the EU suspended its environmental rules for agriculture and introduced a tax on meat. Never let a good crisis go to waste, ladies and gentlemen. That's what it comes down to. And this here is the most concerning, ladies and gentlemen. This part right here is their end goal. Their end goal is to have a carbon tax on humanity, you and me, just for breathing. Their goal is to have a carbon tax and then have that carbon tax attached to a CBDC, which will have your digital identity and your digital credit score on it. That is their end goal, because that means they will have full control over what you can do, period. Over what you can buy, where you can buy it, how much meat you eat, how much gas you use. They'll have total control. Are you prepping yet? They say here the most concerning result of the game, aside from the global food shortage, was a simulated deal between nations to institute a global carbon tax to cap CO2 emissions by 2030. And here in December of 2021, they reported that the plans launched by a new group called the Intrinsic Exchange Group, IEG, that promises to save us from the catastrophe once and for all. They're going to come in and save us. With the help of multinational corporations, billionaires, and the UN, the IEG will rescue the planet by grabbing land in developing nations and turning it into endless profit by creating natural asset corporations. And then multilateral development banks, such as the World Bank, IMF, leverage the debt of developing countries to force them to privatize public access and then sell them off. So you see, this is what these banks do, ladies and gentlemen. This is what large governments do, to include the United States and to include China, and what these large central banks do. The World Bank, which is the bank of central banks, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, they loan money to these nations that are poor, knowing that they can never pay them back. And then when the nations cannot pay them back, they say, well, in this contract it says that now I get to privatize your electric grid. And then they privatize the electric grid, just as an example, in that country. And then the rates for electricity go up tenfold. It's all for profit and control, ladies and gentlemen. They're not doing it because they care about these nations. And the leaders of these nations that take those loans, they should be persecuted. And they should be impeached and thrown out of office. Because it's been long enough that these banks have been doing this. And people should know already that once you make a deal with the devil, eventually you're going to have to pay. that cost. And it's never the people that make the deal with the devil that pay it. It's always the people that they're representing. The Rockefeller Foundation is among the top donors for the IEG. Imagine that. And other groups involved are the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero and the Michael Bloomberg's New Economy Forum. Isn't that a nice name? The New Economy Forum. And I skipped the part where it said that Bill Gates is the largest landowner in the country. I think we've all been beat to death over that one. But it says here that in 2017, the Gates Foundation also pledged $300 million to help low-income farmers in Asia and Africa adapt to climate change. According to an insider report, in 2011, the Oakland Institute made one of its investigative reports public regarding billionaires buying up land in Africa. It's because they know that Africa is going to become the new breadbasket of the world in the decades to come, ladies and gentlemen. The changing of the climate is going to divert water to Africa, and it's not going to be as arid as it has been for our lifetimes. The OI stated that the amount of land being purchased in the continent concerned them, and that hedge funds and other foreign firms have been acquiring large swaths of African land, often without proper contracts. In the same year, the BBC published a headline titled, Hedge Funds Grabbing Land in Africa. Mark my words, ladies and gentlemen. Go watch David Dubine, Adapt 2030. Africa is going to become the new breadbasket of the world in the decades to come, and they know this now. Africa is a very rich continent as it stands now, but it's going to become extremely rich as we go into the future. And we'll finish it off with this, ladies and gentlemen. Whenever there is a manufactured global problem, either the health crisis, the war, climate change, there is usually an immediate global solution offered. The only problem is that the manufacturers of the global problem have to make the people desperate enough to accept their proposed solution. I've talked about that so many times, that when we finally give up our freedoms, it's going to be by choice. All right? The architects of what's going on around the world, they're going to make it so bad for the average layman, right, the average person that's not in the know, that average person is going to beg for their solution. Yes, give me a CBDC. Yes, carbon taxes are going to be good because it means that you're going to give me a UBI on my electric wallet that you issued me from the Federal Reserve. And yes, go ahead and track everything that I do, everything that I buy. Tax me on whatever you want, as long as you give me that loaf of bread. Why, ladies and gentlemen? Because most people will not prepare. Most people will listen to this. If you're still even here, congratulations and thank you. But most people don't have an attention span of a gnat, let alone think for themselves. A lot of it is not even their fault. But there comes a point where you have to say, are you not awake? Have you not seen what's going on? Everything I've gone through has actually happened in the last several years. And look at what's happening now. These people that want to control the world, that want to control us, they're very patient. They think they're going to live forever. They're very patient. They make plans 10 years, 20 years ahead of time. The only problem is that the manufacturers of global problems have to make the people desperate enough to accept their proposed solution. Making them hot during the summer, cold during the winter, and hungry year-round just might be enough. When there is food on the table, there are many problems. But when there is no food on the table, there is only one problem. And that's how they're going to get people. They're going to manufacture and are manufacturing a global food shortage, which will allow them to institute their global solution.